Live from the Orion Cygnus arm of the Milky Way galaxy, this is Scientifically Speaking, a weekly half-hour program devoted to elegant curiosities, and I am one of your hosts, Sarah Chang, and joining me, as always, is Bernie Rhyme, DJ Star Watcher. How are you, Bernie?
Yes, hi, Sarah. Very good. Thank you.
Bernie is our awesome professor of the astronomy lab at USM and our local protector of the night skies. Reach out to us at WMPG Scientifically Speaking at gmail.com or on Twitter at WMPG SciSpeak. If you've got questions, you can shoot them our way. And if you want to hear the last 5 weeks of archives, you can head to WMPG.org, where you can find our show and all of your other favorite shows there. Bernie, could you let our listeners know what is up in the night sky for this coming week?
Okay, good. Yes, I'll do that. So this Friday is February 5th. So basically, it'll be a last quarter moon. Officially, it was last quarter last night, but it will still look like that second half of the moon there. So that means it'll come up around midnight. So you'll be able to see some things first. Of course, we lost Jupiter and Saturn a couple of weeks ago. And for a while, there was about a week where you could see Mercury near them, but it wasn't clear enough and it was kind of low, so I wasn't able to see it. So hopefully some of our listeners were able to catch Mercury with Jupiter and Saturn just before they exited, but I wasn't able to see that. So they're all gone. So we have only Mars left and then only Venus left in the morning sky. So that's basically it. Last quarter moon. And actually, this is the midpoint of winter. So I know it hasn't been very cold and felt a lot like winter, like a permanent January thaw. But officially, of course, Groundhog Day was on February 2nd, and that's the halfway point of winter. So we're halfway through winter. Days are getting like 3 minutes longer every day, and we're heading right to the vernal equinox in just 6 more weeks.
Yeah, I feel like the countdown to the winter solstice is always the saddest part. And then once we hit that and we start getting more daylight, you start feeling a little bit happier.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Bernie. And if you couldn't take notes fast enough, you can also check out the monthly What's Up column in the Portland Press Herald. You're listening to part 2 of our conversation with Jedidiah Beadle, a farmer and who had worked on a farm with Bernie, which is how we know him, and right now resides in South Dakota. We've been talking about regenerative just keep having trouble with that word, regenerative agriculture, organic farming, natural farming, whatever you want to call it. So enjoy. So Jed, you have a lot of experience with so many different types, and I know we had talked about labels in the beginning and how it seems to me that the labels are irrelevant to you, right? You just farm a good farm, I guess. You just bring all good practices that you feel are healthy for the plants, the crops, and even nature because of all the diversity aspects of it. And you just get right to it.
Yeah, I think it's all about, feeding people healthy foods and nutrient density and the science and the passion and the joy of working outdoors in nature and regenerative, organic, renewable, whatever you want to call it. I guess it's all the same. I guess to me it's all about just growing healthy food and enjoying it and living a good life.
I think that's a great motto.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
so how can let's just start small as far as how can folks get started with something like this? So, let's just start with the individual who lives in Portland, Maine, has no land, has a balcony, has access to a community garden, etc. What should they keep in mind if they're kind of starting on this and they want to grow something like tomatoes and herbs and kind of your typical balcony plants, but to have really nutrient dense versions of them?
Yeah, those are good questions. Being in Portland, you have access to a lot of good resources like MOFGA and different organizations, NOFA. I lived in Portland. I don't live there anymore, but when I did, it was kind of the time of coronavirus, and I was wanting to buy a farm, but I couldn't. And so all of a sudden, I found myself trying to expedite the process of farming. So I started doing it from home, and I bought a 40-pound bag of bird seed, sunflower seeds, and I started to try to grow those, which was kind of a bad idea. You need, even though they are black oil sunflower seeds, you need the food grade ones that don't have sticks and stuff. It's possible you could grow sunflower shoots with bird seed, but yeah, Mums is the best supplier I know. They're out of Canada. And if you buy maybe 20 pounds or something, spend 50 or 100 bucks, you can get a big bag of seed, and you can sprout a couple 100 grams and then put them in a flat. You soak them once, you soak them overnight, and then you rinse them a couple days, and then you basically grow them, and you can have some of the most nutritious food on the planet right in your house with partial sunlight, no south facing window necessary, no balcony necessary. You can grow things like that. You can do broccoli sprouts. That's kind of like the cheapest, healthiest food you can grow. And yeah, so there's microgreens are huge, sprouts are huge. Yeah, you could do 5-gallon buckets with tomatoes, buy a bag of organic soil and some seeds at Johnny's. There's tons of options. And I mean, the University of YouTube, obviously, you can.
YouTube.
So, yeah, and Curtis Stone is a guy on YouTube out of Canada who teaches a bunch of stuff for free. There's tons of guys, girls on there. John Martin Fortier out of Quebec. Yeah.
I'm curious though because good quality soil and biodiversity in soil is such an important part of this kind of this way of growing food. And I know if you listen to our last show, Bernie had also mentioned having different types of livestock and having rotating your crops and rotating your livestock through your fields, so that the soil has time to breathe. But in the home environment, I know it's definitely such a much smaller scale. But for example, if you have that 5-gallon bucket to grow your tomatoes, at the end of your growing season per se, should you be doing something to that soil? Should you be how can you be replenishing it, because it's such a closed system? There's nothing really going in or out, is there?
Yeah.
I also assume you're probably not having worms in your indoor home garden.
Right. Yeah. It's unfortunate. Most people I've seen will just throw the stuff out. In this country, they'll just say, "Okay, this is just a 5-gallon bucket of soil. I can go get another bag." So most people seem to just maybe throw it out or maybe throw it in their yard, which is fine, I guess. Yeah, you could potentially get some fertilizer, some organic fertilizer maybe, and try to replenish some of the nutrients. I don't think most people are going to do a soil test and see what they need from their 5-gallon bucket of soil. And so, yeah, I mean, you could try to just grow again in it and see, you might be able to get a few different crops out of the same soil before it's too depleted, and then swap it out.
Is there anything else that you can add though besides say going to the store and buying something? I have a couple of containers at home that I'll throw in, and I've just always done this. I don't even know if it does anything, but powdered eggshells, or like coffee, or the water that I use to rinse my rice. I don't know. Is there anything like that you feel like it actually is helpful for that soil and to be able to then keep reusing it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on farms where there was somebody with a garden, a home garden, and the family would just throw their produce out, their peels and whatnot into the garden. And if you have a home garden, a lot of people have more than just a balcony. So if you have an actual garden, I think it's fine to grow stuff in there. It builds organic matter. And you can also find like leaf mold If you have big trees underneath like the first layer, you might find very moldy, rich leaves, organic matter, lots of worms and fungus, and throw some of that in there and kind of play around with it. You don't necessarily need to be too scientific. You can kind of do things on your own and test things and try things. Yeah. So
Perfect. And have you ever, I know you've worked on many farms, have you ever started your own farm?
well, I've not started my own farm. I almost bought
Because
it.
you wanted to, right?
I still do. It's we live in capitalism, so in this society we need capital to start a farm, and without having an inheritance or a super high income, it's kind of hard not to, or it's just kind of hard to do that, without years of saving and
Hmm.
building up for it. So I mean, I've definitely worked in projects where I've started gardens and things of that nature, and I plan to start a farm, and it will be maybe a quarter acre, half acre starting. So something on a very small scale and kind of build up little by little to potentially only an acre and a half. I wouldn't probably want to go much bigger than
Yeah.
a couple acres. So
So, since you already have this in mind, I'm assuming that you also have some plan in mind. And so, let's say I throw a scenario at you where you are given a really good deal on your half quarter acre of land, but it's like desert. Like, what would you do to get it up to speed? Like, let's say it can get to that point because your neighbors are, they have flourishing crops, but this piece of land, the previous owner was just very neglectful, or had a bunch of cattle that ate everything up. What would be your first step?
wow, um, yeah, that's what it's all about. I mean, there's an old saying: bad farms make good farmers. So
Mm,
you know, ideally, you could just be thrown a piece of land with perfect soil, but that's usually not the case.
mm.
Some of my best friends bought farms with horrible soil, absolutely horrible. After 5 years, they finally are able to grow onions and kale. And so, first, you kind of need to, I think water is super key. So, that would probably be the first thing, would to be making sure that the water is of a good quality. And then, yeah, going to the soil and testing the soil. I mean, yeah, if it was given to me or something and I wasn't able to choose, like I was shopping in Maine and I would find a house and then I'd go look at the farm and the ground and it'd be like this yellowy soil full of rocks, and I'd say, no, should have looked at this first. Like we spent an hour and a half in the house and come out here and I already know I'm not gonna want to do this. So I mean, yeah, it's possible, to have like this regenerative mindset of building. I think that's really kind of the mindset we should have, is to kind of want to improve the world that we live in, not just to find what's already good and
Hmm.
go with that, but on some level you have to be willing to do tons of work to it, and it takes a lot of money. You might need to buy a lot of peat moss, you might need to buy a lot of soil amendments, you might need Alaskan humates, you might need all these different things to build the soil. And is that very sustainable too? It might be debatable. And so yeah, there's a lot of philosophy that goes into it as well, and morals and ethics.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Whether or not the restoration is worth it. Actually, this is kind of a side note, but it makes me think about um, folks who are really into kind of making local, let's say local lotions or something. And it's made in Maine, but all of their ingredients are sourced from elsewhere. So is it really local? And is that good? Because
It's the same thing with organics. With the organic certification, you might get this mine mineral that's an organic mineral to put in your soil, but it's like a rare mineral that's been mined. And so it's like, okay, this is somewhat, or you got this organic farm that just puts all this plastic down that they take up every year,
Mm.
poke holes in and put their plants in so they don't have to weed and it's organic, but yet they're so wasteful, and yeah, there's a lot of hard things to wrap your mind around. I think it's just to be reasonable. Okay, like a greenhouse, it's not going to do too much harm. It's going to do a lot more good than bad. So I'm going to build a greenhouse. I'm going to have a tractor. I hope that it's not a really old tractor that will lose a bunch of oil in my field. Yeah, I think just being reasonable and yeah, saying, okay, obviously I can't work this piece of land. This is too much. Or, okay, this is going to be a big piece of work, but that's what I signed up for.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good question.
So, Bernie also mentions that you have traveled extensively to farms around the world. Could you give our listeners an idea of what that was like? Where'd you go and what did you do? What was the purpose?
Sure. Yeah. In the U.S., I've traveled all over and I've worked on most recently in Maine and Vermont. I worked on Six River Farm in Maine. I worked on Full Moon Farm in Vermont, which was the Lieutenant Governor's farm. That was interesting working there at the farmer's market with him and people coming up all the time at farmers markets like, hey, David Zuckerman or what? No, I forget his name. It's something like the Facebook guy.
Zuckerberg.
But yeah, no, I've also farmed in France and Costa Rica and Patagonia, and I think one of the most interesting was being in Oregon, of all places, just because I was with a lot of Latinos working under the table, and I speak Spanish fluently, so like getting to kind of hear their stories and see the reality of this country, like farming in Italy and France and stuff, and those places are all fun and dandy. You get to, I mean, not all fun and dandy. Sometimes it's carrying concrete buckets up a mountain, to build terraces for their beautiful farms. But yeah, just seeing the the reality of what our food is, how our food is grown, and yeah, it's kind of heart wrenching. I bought a spaghetti squash and I looked at it, and it's like this is grown by people who are underpaid, overworked, and we don't think about these things. And in Maine, we have these organic gardens, these French model, this French intensive style garden farm. And in Oregon, you got this huge organic farm, and the people running the farmers markets are not the people who grow the food.
Mm.
And so it's just like these dichotomies. And that's been really interesting to kind of see through my experience. And yeah, growing in the tropics, seeing star fruits and getting to see different foods around the world is pretty amazing too. Yeah, I haven't farmed all over the world, mainly just a few countries in Europe and some in Latin America and all over the U.S. And yeah, it's been good. Utah, having rashes on my face because I'm wiping sweat all day because it's 100 degrees, and yeah, jumping into a pond after work every day, and the biology of the soil you put in, you inoculate the soil and then it just burns up, and so you're constantly trying to amend the soil, but the heat just kills it. It just bakes everything. So you're
Wow.
constant, yeah.
Is there any one practice or a couple practices that really stand out in your mind that you're like, wow, this is really ingenious, or that's really, I never would have thought of that, or why aren't we doing more of that?
Um, I find it fascinating the work that John Kemp is doing with some of these
You love
plant
this
sap
guy.
analysis. Yeah. He's a former Amish guy, and he was like kicked out because he uses his computer.
Oh, well.
And practices that I love. I really do enjoy the French intensive style of just having canopies and doing things in an intensive way that you can have a high yield on a small.
What does that mean by like what is an intensive? I mean, to me, farming is all intensive. So,
Yeah.
what is this special intensive way?
Well, I mean, if you go to Walmart or the corner store or whatever and buy a seed pack, it'll tell you on the back, tomatoes. Okay, plant one tomato plant every 3 feet. Well, the way we do it is we plant them one every 6 inches.
Hmm.
So that is a lot more intensive, and you do a lot of pruning, and you do a lot of things to really get the highest yield
Mm.
and in the smallest space. Or you trellis things, so you're growing things vertically. You can have a melon hanging in the air, or squash, or just yeah, kind of trying to maximize the space and get the most out of your spot while not having to amend as much as well,
Hmm.
even though you might have to put a little more in because the plants will be using more. I think ultimately it uses less, so that's good as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Sounds like high rise farming, where like the melons are.
yeah,
If you don't have the land for it, just grow up.
right. Yeah, it's pretty
Cities
interesting.
could do that.
Technology.
The whole
What's it?
vertical farming in cities, that could be big.
Yeah, I went to Brooklyn Grange, the biggest rooftop farm in the
Mm.
country in Queens, New York.
Mm.
And their soil medium was like some rock pebble. I don't know how they were
Mm.
producing any food in that, but maybe it was because it was lightweight. I don't know, but they have a big CSA. It's a couple acres. And yeah, a lot of interesting things happening.
Did you do some farming in Patagonia too? I know you led some adventure tours down there, but is that South America
Yeah,
different from Latin America?
yeah. I had a friend who was like a pastor of this church that I was kind of hanging out with, and I would go to his house, and he had sheep. He was like the whole gaucho, greenhouses, and yeah, I kind of just helped him do basic gardening stuff. It was a lot more. It reminded me of like the Zapatistas or something, how they use a bottle and they poke a hole in the lid, and they put their seeds in and squeeze the bottle and walk down the field. It's a lot simpler, and I really appreciate that. A lot of us here, I went to the main organic Common Ground Fair, and they had this demo on all these new tools, and it was just overwhelming. For an hour and a half, I was watching all the farmer celebrities, show off all these tools. I was at the end of it, I was just like, I really enjoy what I seen in Latin America, and just getting back to like hand seeding, beans. You can, with your fingers, seed them pretty quick. You don't need to get this battery operated high tech. There's this weeder called a mutineer and all these things with these different attachments. And I think they're really good and handy. They're tools, but I think for me it's a little too much sometimes. Just give me the simple, basic stuff, and I'll produce. you know.
That story reminds me of all the rainbow colors of kitchen gadgets, where you have one function gadgets, I guess,
Yeah.
but they do serve their purposes.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of really good systems that farmers have put into place that people can practice in their homes. Like, is it the Toyota guy came up with that 5S or some, everything
Mm-hmm.
has a place.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a book called The Lean Farm, and it kind of uses that practice. And it's about leaning the farm, making it a very
Yeah.
Mm.
compact, organized place where you're not spending, you have an employee and he's spending a half hour looking for, the hoe or something.
Yeah, like we did at our farm. We spent a lot of time looking for our tools. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you know about 5S at the time? Were you able to apply that?
No, I probably would have. I do remember we on that farm. I did see they had spilanthes growing, and they didn't even know what that was. And it was it's also known as electric daisy. everybody, all the listeners should buy these seeds and grow them. They're these little flowers that you eat, and it's like pop rocks in your mouth.
Huh.
And it numbs your mouth, and it's kind of a prank. And so I showed the kids. I was like, look, you guys have spilanthes. And then they went around giving it to all the adults, and everybody's drooling and freaking out.
How do you spell that?
Spilanthes. Spilanthes.
Wow,
Oh,
they're
trying to
these
give me some of
yellow.
those.
Yeah, they're these like yellow pod-like with a pink center kind of flower. I also see it
Yeah,
as a toothache plant or a headache plant.
they're also dewormers for the record.
Ah. Do you happen to know any other? I mentioned buckwheat was one of the flowers in the last episode that were used as pesticides, natural pesticides. And then you're saying that these are dewormers. Are there other? Oh, deworming for us or deworming for our?
For humans.
Oh, okay. Like any kind of worms.
Yeah, maybe feed them to your dog. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess heartworm is like a big one. I don't know if it'd be
Oh yeah,
effective for that.
yeah. I don't know exactly, but
Yeah,
yeah,
we're not veterinarians or doctors here.
it's more of like a joke to play on somebody. Like, hey, eat this, and then watch them start burping and drooling. And but it is an oral cleanser, and there are benefits as
Yeah,
well.
interesting. And on that note, are there any last words that you would say to a listener who, like, this is the first time they're hearing about, these kinds of practices and possibly bringing it to their own home or maybe supporting, how would they find out, like, supporting farmers who grow this way?
Yeah, I would say farmers markets are one of the best places. People don't go to those as much. I would encourage more of that. I made a great community in Portland when I was there through farmers markets, and attending the gatherings that MAFCA has is super good, and volunteering with different organizations, searching, looking up some of these resources, in Maine. Elliot Coleman wrote the books right there in Maine. And so just digging into some of those books and trying to learn, and getting into microgreens too is huge. It's a huge step people can take if they want to be frugal and healthy and creative. I think it's a great way to start growing stuff, is with either like just in a jar or in a jar and then into a tray, and it's cheap and simple and beneficial. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jed, for joining us with myself and Bernie, and really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experiences with our listeners.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Scientifically Speaking here on WMPG with myself, Bernie, and Jedidiah Beadle. Stay tuned for Sports Jam with Colin and Connor. And from your favorite nerds, mask up, and we wish you healthy bodies and clean air.